Coming up on this week's episode of Destination Linux, we have a very special announcement you're absolutely going to love and is guaranteed to make you happy. We're going to talk to Neal Gompa, a Fedora 33 package maintainer and contributor to open source, about the latest Fedora release. And then we'll head to space and discuss how Linux is powering the future of exploration and technology. In our gaming section, we'll announce a new cloud streaming service that's going to blow your mind. And of course, our popular tips, tricks, and software picks. All this and so much more coming up right now on Destination Linux. Welcome to episode 198 of Destination Linux. Get your DLN mugs, take a sip, sit down and relax, and prepare to have an open source Linux goodness delivered right to your front door and your brain. My name's Noah. With me today are the future Moon Water Bottling Company executives, Michael, Ryan, and Jill. This week's, instead of our roundtable, we're going to discuss some very exciting announcements at DLN and in our community. The first announcement, we're about to celebrate our 200th episode of Destination Linux. We're going to celebrate in the best way that we know how, and that's by having a game fest the day we record episode 200. Everyone is welcome. We can't wait to have a one-shot, no-scope one another. We will be streaming it online on Twitter and Twitch. So clear your calendars. November 15th at 4 p.m. Eastern, we'll be playing at our very own DL Xenotic and SuperTux Kart server. But that's not the only exciting news.
Yes, not just episode 200 and not just Game Fest. We have filled the fourth host spot of Destination Linux, and we filled that with Jill Bryant right here. So a permanent host of Destination Linux now, somebody who's guaranteed to make you happy, like we said in the intro. Every time we have Jill on, the amount of feedback we get from the audience, the amount of people who say they watched the episode and it made them happier, it made their day brighter, they thought it was just so special. We could not, the infectiously happy Jill, we could not go without. What do people need more in 2020 than somebody who is as happy and kind as Jill, to add some adultness to the show? For one, that would be really important. But number two, some much needed happiness. So thank you, Jill, so much. We are so excited to have you.
I am so honored and excited. And it's just, it's so wonderful being able to work with Michael, Ryan, and Noah. You have no idea. This has made my 2020. Sure.
Just wait for a couple episodes before you make that claim. You may be retracting that.
You'll see. You'll see how it is. But we're also not done yet. We still have some more stuff to announce. Like, there's a new show joining the DLN family. You stay tuned in the next few weeks. So we finalize the details and give you that. It's also time for us bringing back the DLN Community charity event. We want to have the community put their opinion in and let us know, like, what charity you want us to participate with. So if you have any suggestions, go to the DLN Discourse forum. We'll have a link for that thread in the show notes and in the video description.
Since our last charity, though, Michael, we had probably, 15,000 less listeners back then. So for those who don't know, we have Free Geek was a charity that we sponsored when we initially kicked off the Destination Linux network.
Yeah.
And we were able to raise thousands of dollars for Free Geek, thanks to our amazing community. And towards the end, me and Noah getting in a battle of who could donate the most also helped throw that over the edge. And then on top of that, we were able to get equipment to Free Geek. And this all helped close, their mission is to work on the digital divide and help get computers in the hands of underprivileged individuals, people who hit hardships, children now. So we were able to do amazing things with Free Geek during that time. This is something we want to continue to keep doing with the community. It's important that we're involved within these problems that we talk about on the show and figure out ways to solve them. So this is your chance to put in those charities in the discourse forum. Go there, put in the charity that you think. We're looking for someone worldwide, preferably because our audience is worldwide.
Right.
So that everybody has a reason to kind of get involved. There's so many good causes out there to get involved with in 2020. So put those in there. We then reach out to those charities and find which ones are interested in working back with us. And then we'll do events and things tied to that to help raise awareness, raise some funds, or get equipment, or whatever the charity's big push is to help that move forward, utilizing really the power and reach of the Destination Linux network. So definitely participate and go look for some great charities out there.
Yeah, and also we are super interested in the digital divide. So you have any particular charities that are specific to that, that would be fantastic. We would love to know more about those. Please do so. And we'll have a link for the discourse thread in the show notes and in the video description.
That's a heck of an opening. What do we do now? I know. Noah, agree.
This episode of Destination Linux is brought to you by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean recently announced their new app platform service, which is a solution to build modern cloud-native apps. With App Platform, you can build, deploy, and scale apps and static websites quickly and easily. Simply point your GitHub repository and let the App Platform do all the heavy lifting. It supports things like Node.js, Python, Go, PHP, Ruby, static sites, and Docker. DigitalOcean runs all their App Platform on their own infrastructure, so your costs are significantly lower than with other products. Plus, they built this new App Platform on top of the DigitalOcean Kubernetes, providing a smoother migration path so that you can take more control of your infrastructure setup. And as a listener of the Destination Linux podcast and a member of the DLN community, you can get started for free. Better than that, for free, because DigitalOcean is giving you a $100 credit. You can go to do.co/DLN and use that $100 free credit on DigitalOcean's new app platform. Of course, we want to thank DigitalOcean for sponsoring this week's episode of Destination Linux.
In our community feedback this week, Mike writes us to say, and I had to abridge this email some due to the length, but the gist of it is, hello guys, I've just listened to the latest Destination Linux. As always, it's a good podcast. You should have put great there, but we accept good. But I have to take issue with your comments about Microsoft in their attempt to bring Edge to Linux. I have been working with Linux for 25 years, for the last 8 years, totally blind. A very large number of Linux programs are just not usable, and a lot of them, the distribution cannot be installed by a person who is blind like me without assistance. Comparing Windows to Linux for accessibility is no contest. I can even install Windows 10 now unassisted by starting with the internal screen reader when I boot the installation media. Microsoft has put in a very large amount of money and effort to make Windows accessible to disabled people, including blind and visually impaired people. And a big part of this reason is Section 503 of the Rehabilitation Act. This means the very large section of corporate America could not use Linux on the desktop, even if they wanted to. You can bet your bottom dollar that whatever software Microsoft ports to Linux will have the same attention to accessibility to the software it makes for Windows, and then Office 365 arrives on Linux that will no doubt be fully accessible. Apple also has accessibility in both macOS and iOS, which it streets ahead of Android and Linux. And no doubt, your beloved Ubuntu Touch would render a phone totally unusable by me, whereas I can do pretty much as you could do with my iPhone 8 Plus. He goes on to mention he would like us to cover more accessibility information when we're talking about these distros. So, first of all, I looked into this because Mike has reached out to us before about covering accessibility issues in different distros. And certainly the big distros like Ubuntu, Fedora are heavily documented for their accessibility capabilities. A lot of the accessibility is actually based in the desktop environment that you choose. So when we're talking about a Fedora and you use a GNOME, GNOME, there's a lot of accessibility built into GNOME and a lot of documentation around that. I have worked with and actually ported accessibility documentation, wrote myself for Pop! OS, for instance, but a lot of that is based on the work that is done by GNOME. So other distros that are generally smaller, I have noticed, do not put any accessibility documentation or even link to it within their documents. And that is certainly something for the community members and things to go reach out and talk to those individuals about. But aside from that, I think it's very interesting that he states that, there's just so much better accessibility because of this Rehabilitation Act that Microsoft has to follow in Microsoft products. But when you're starting with Edge really is just a rebranded Chrome. So I don't think that Microsoft is putting anything additional accessibility-wise in there because they're utilizing Google's Chrome or Chromium, I guess you would say, to build their infrastructure and just putting some, different links and wallpapers and search engine option on top of it. So I don't really see how that one fits, but certainly maybe if Office and others, as he mentioned, did come to Linux in the future, they would have the accessibility options that they had over in Windows brought over to Linux?
I mean, they probably do something just because, just to make it be consistent with the rest of their stuff. It makes sense if they did something, but I also agree that they probably didn't, because the majority of their code is from the Chromium base. But I do think that the point about accessibility being a part of distribution reviews and a part of the things that we discuss is very important. And we tried to do that previously, but sometimes it's hard to find that information. Like, for example, Ryan wrote stuff for Pop! OS, but before that, they didn't have any accessibility stuff, right? And I think that that's a lot of projects have that issue. So it's hard to find the information, but I can definitely tell you that going forward, whenever we have a project that we are covering and we are able to find the information, we will absolutely provide it.
Yeah. Jill, anything to add in here?
Oh, yes. So I've tested the Orca screen reader on Edge and Chromium, and they've worked just fine for me. And so everyone knows I am half blind. So I do use magnification tools. Under Ubuntu Mate, I've used Magnus and, the default ones and GNOME and XFCE, and they work very well for me, but I'm only half blind. But sometimes my good eye gets tired. So I will use screen readers. And Orca has been good for me, although for installing the OS, that is a different issue. And in fact, years ago, you remember Jonathan Nadeau? He had started the Accessibility Computing Foundation and was working on his Sonar Linux Ubuntu distro for the visually impaired. And it didn't get funded well. So he kind of had to stop that project. And he's had Indiegogo campaigns to help improve his distro and Orca, and that was quite a few years ago. And there needs to be more push for accessibility on Linux. Absolutely. It is a problem. I know my animation students, when I was teaching animation in Windows years ago, they were using the JAWS screen reader and ZoomText screen magnification software for Windows. But those are proprietary and extremely expensive. It's $2,100 for the two of those pieces of software alone, which most people who are blind or visually impaired, don't have the money to pay for that. And they do work very well. And I do have actually friends who are completely blind that do love iOS for that reason. It's really easy. Apple has done a very good job with the accessibility and the screen reading on iOS.
I'm kind of surprised to hear that there isn't this push in Linux for this, because Linux is used in enterprise environments.
Yeah.
Linux would be used across many different businesses that do have to comply with these different acts. So I would think that, and I know there's some, but I was honestly surprised it wasn't more organized than it is, because there is a lot of corporations utilizing Linux that would need this type of service in there. So, this all goes back to the community at the end of the day. If people get involved to build this stuff, I don't think you would find a distro out there that wouldn't include it in their project.
Promotion is as important as building it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Definitely.
Yep. So I definitely recommend that if you are, somebody who can help in this area, to take a look at what's out there for Linux, because there is a lot of different accessibility tools out there. Fedora, I think, has some of the best documentation I've seen as far as the accessibility pieces that they've built in. So go look at that and see if that's somewhere where you can add some help, because this is something in Linux that definitely could use some improvement.
We love hearing from our worldwide community. What we want you to do is get your official DLN mug, fill it with some coffee, and sit down at the nearest stool and send us an email. Send your emails to comments@DestinationLinux.org. This week, we wanted to talk with one of our patrons, Neal Gompa, who is a contributor to OpenSUSE Project, Fedora Project, DevOps engineer, and a DLN show fact checker. He's a wealth of knowledge in Linux and open source. And with the release of Fedora 33, we thought it'd be a great idea to speak with somebody, with one of the individuals that contributes to Fedora, and share his perspective with all of you. So, Neal, welcome into the program.
Hey, Noah. It's great to be here.
Let's start with your Linux journey, Neal. How did you get started in Linux?
Oh, wow. So it was 2001, 2002, just one of those days I was in my local library, And instead of going up to where the children's books, the video games were, because the computer lab was full of people, so I went down to the serious books section and looked for the computer books. And there was these books over there about Linux. And they included a DVD or in some cases, like a collection of CDs to install Linux on. And that's how I found this. I forget which book it was. I think it was like some Sam's Publishing Mastering Red Hat Linux. And it had a copy of Red Hat Linux 6.2 on it. So that was the first version of Linux that I actually loaded on a computer, and I dual booted with Windows XP, broke my computer entirely, and that was the starting point for everything. And
that's what made you want to stay.
Well, yes, because by that point, like I had been using computers a little bit for like almost my entire life, even by that point, and it had gotten to the point where even at the Windows XP era, I think if some people may remember that. It was often talked about as Fisher Price, and it was trending towards lockdown and very restricted in what you could do. Things like being able to theme the desktop became almost impossible because it required digital signatures and crap like that. And it took a few years, and they figured out how to break it. But like that's the way it was. And I was looking for ways to like explore and play with my computer more and to do more interesting things. And that outlet, it just kind of coincided with me discovering Linux at the same time. And I just sort of slid right into it. Now, in 2002, Red Hat Linux 6.2 is quite old, 1999. But hey, I went from there to 7.0, and I tried out all these other distros, Mandrake, SUSE, and it just kind of fell in love with it and kept going with it. And I went from Red Hat to Fedora. I did Ubuntu shortly after they released in 2005 and kept doing Ubuntu and Fedora dual. And then finally in 2013 or so, I switched to Fedora full-time for everything. And I do other distributions as well as, I'm a contributor in OpenSUSE and Magi and OpenMandriva and some other places. But that's basically, I primarily call Fedora and OpenSUSE my home at this point.
Nice.
Yeah, Neal, that's awesome. Thank you for sharing that.
I don't think I've ever
amazing.
actually said this before to anybody. Like nobody's ever actually asked.
I haven't heard that either. And I've known you for a while. So, Neal, since 2007, you've created and maintained distribution packages for RPM and some official Fedora packages.
Yeah.
And many people want to give back, but are not sure where to start. How do you get started in package maintenance and support?
So in Fedora land and in OpenSUSE land, the easiest way is find a piece of software that you already have in the distribution and ask and see if you can help with it. Like maybe help it get updated to the next version, because there's always new versions of software coming. In Fedora, we have a Git forge that backs all of our package sources. src.fedoraproject.org. It's a Pagure instance, so it takes pull requests. So if you can sign in, you can fork a package, make some changes, send a pull request, and the maintainers can take a look at it and see if it's good, and then merge it and push it out. That's a really easy way to kind of get started, like sending patches, fixing things like that. And then you could even go down the path of like, there's a piece of software you found on GitHub or whatever. It's nice, it's open source, it's clean, and it's cool, and you'd like to share it with the world. Bring it into the Fedora package collection. There's a really easy process for getting started to actually, put that package into the collection and get it out there. And you can push it out into the Rawhide and the stable releases. You can package it for CentOS and RHEL through the Fedora EPEL project, extra packages for enterprise Linux. So there's a whole bunch of opportunities on the packaging front. But I would also want to point out packaging is not the only way you can help. There's lots of other ways. It's testing, it's documentation, it's artwork, it's marketing, it's ambassadorships, it's all that sort of stuff. Like all of those things are important, possibly even more so because like we overbalance on packaging and software development, but it also matters that people know how to use the system, that people know that the system exists, and that they can figure out how to contribute and be involved and be part of the community. This is what makes Linux successful. It's the community, and that's not just packagers. It's everyone.
Yeah. So absolutely. I was looking at Fedora's package management instructions. I'm sorry, not just package management instructions, but their entire contributor process, because there's articles out there. I think Fedora Magazine even wrote some articles about this. And one of the things I really liked about how they kind of talk through the different options you have for contributing is there is actually an example, if you wanted to be a packager, of a package somebody's maintaining, and they're going step by step with the screenshots in the instructions showing you what they have to go through to get one of these packages updated. Now, I have to admit, at certain parts, my eyes glazed over, and I was like, I don't know if I could do that. So I went back to the documentation contributor section and signed up there instead, because that's a little bit more up my alley. But there is really good documentation for Fedora in contributing there, which is awesome for those, because I see so many people in the community asking, how do I get involved? Generally, when you go to a lot of distros, frankly, their instructions for getting involved are extremely vague, like join this group, introduce yourself, and see where you can help out. Well, that's a little difficult, right? When it's just very awkward and uncomfortable, but there's a lot of good options out there for those who are interested.
Yeah, and the best tip for distros or projects or anything, ask for specific things. Like, I mean, Fedora is doing it really good. They have the specific sections of different ways that you can contribute and that sort of stuff. So, like, asking for specifics is a lot easier than asking for a broad, contribute or whatever, because it's kind of confusing to get started in a lot of these projects. And Fedora is a good example of doing that.
Yeah, and for people who are a little uncomfortable about getting started, because especially if it's your first project ever, you have no idea how to take those first steps, regardless of which path you want to take. There's now a Fedora Join special interest group that what they do is they help people who are interested in making that transition from being just a user to being also a contributor of any kind, not just packaging, but like any part of the project.
That is awesome.
And they help people get started, figure out how to introduce themselves, how to make their first contributions, and they walk them through that process and give them proper mentorship. That is one of the things I'm really happy to see in the Fedora project, because it helps make it easier for people to feel like going from being just a user to being part of the community as a contributor is possible. And users are part of the community as well. It's just, a lot of people feel like, well, if I'm just a user, it's not enough. But you're providing a valuable service in yourself there. If you want to do more, that's fantastic. And there's paths to get there. But also being a user and sharing your experiences and helping others see the awesomeness of Fedora, that is fantastic. That is the way to go.
Nice.
So I joined that group, Neal, and the first message I got is this the real DOS Geek? And then I said, yes, it is. And then the next message is, well, whether it's true or not that you're the real DOS Geek or a fake one, welcome either way. And then we started from there. So it was a nice kickoff.
Nice.
That's awesome.
So we asked you to be on the show because about Fedora 33. So let's talk about Fedora 33. So looking at it today, what would you say is the biggest difference in the goals between this release of Fedora and the Fedora releases of, say, just a few years ago?
So that's a great and tough question. I want to say that the biggest difference here between now and releases of a few years ago is that all the easy problems have kind of been solved, and we're now trying to tackle the most difficult parts of making a smooth Linux experience. So we talk about, for example, with Fedora 32, we introduced the early out-of-memory manager, early to try to improve responsiveness and prevent system lockup scenarios. We've done a lot in terms of resource control stuff with adopting system to user sessions for GNOME, and we're hopefully going to do that really soon with KDE Plasma. The transition of the file system from Ext4 on top of LVM to Btrfs is also part of that story to provide a better user experience in terms of avoiding that awful calculation that people have to do where they don't really know about, well, how much space should be on the operating system data and how much space should be for my user data. And there's no fixing that after the fact. So with the change to Btrfs, it's about fixing those kinds of undercurrent pain points that people are well, I mean, I've had to do this and everyone else has to do this. At this point, I've figured out everything. It's new people aren't going to know that. And especially if you're coming from operating systems like Microsoft Windows or Apple macOS, where in that world, you don't know whether or not you have splits and things like that. And in some cases, it's not even supported. You can't easily do a split of your user and operating system data in Windows. It's possible. It's just a pain. Don't do it. But in Linux, it's something that we expect, but people don't know how to develop that intuition of what's the right split. So let's just not make it a requirement. That brings the barriers down. And even things the switch to Nano as the default text editor, right? That seems like a weird thing to do. Why would we care about the terminal when we're focusing on the graphical environment? Well, Fedora is also a place where a lot of developers work, and like it or not, I mean, personally, I think it kind of sucks that developers have to work in the terminal so much. But if you have to work in the terminal, it shouldn't be a pain, and you shouldn't be struggling through doing basic things. And things like switching the default editor to something that's helps people understand what they're trying to do and gives them some kind of hints of what they're supposed to do, like Nano does. It makes it so that people can be more successful in doing what they're trying to do on their system.
And let's be fair too. If you're an experienced user that likes to use Vim instead, you can go get that still. This is it's kind of the defaults. Right. And you know how to go get that, right? Because you're this experienced Vim user. You've even mastered how to get out of it, which is amazing.
Out of Vim.
Exactly.
That's
so look.
I mean, Vim's awesome and powerful, but if you know that you need it, then you know how to install it and go get it. So it's not a big deal. One of the things that I noticed, Neal, about Fedora 33, and I want to read Walt, one of our patrons' comments here because it echoes exactly my experience with Fedora 33. He said, Fedora 33 is the first version that had everything I needed to work without me pulling my hair out to get it to work. I was impressed enough to install it on all my computers. I will tell you, when I first came into Linux 4 years ago and tried Fedora, it lasted about 15 seconds on my machine. And then I went right back to an Ubuntu base because I didn't get it. Things weren't working right. I didn't know how to get the software I needed. It didn't make sense. When I went back and tried Fedora 33, I feel like, whether this was the intention or not, this is the first time I installed Fedora and said, hey, they're actually targeting the desktop user. Like, they're not ignoring the desktop user. It's the first time I felt that way.
I'm glad you felt that way. To be clear, this has been the intent for, God knows how long. I think at least since I've started doing desktop Linux stuff like 5 or so years ago. But it's a long, hard road to get even the basic stuff ready, to be able to pull off that spit and shine polish stuff, like getting the foundations ready to go so that you could do these sorts of improvements. It's a long, hard road. We switched to Wayland in Fedora 26 for the GNOME desktop. We're switching to Wayland for KDE Plasma in Fedora 34. But switching to Wayland also meant that we were able to improve the experience in terms of responsiveness. We were able to have the accuracy for frames and things like that. We were able to add security domains for things like that in terms of desktop applications, with the portals, the flat packs. Even while we don't actively promote snaps, we have support for snaps as well. And of course, we've got RPMs and GNOME software manages all that, or Plasma Discover. And we try to put together a user experience where people feel like they can develop some intuition really easily to be successful in using their desktop on a day-to-day basis. Because most people don't need to be thinking about their operating system on a day-to-day basis. They shouldn't have to think about how, when you click a thing, that it's going to have this kind of effect, and this is the effect you want, or this is the effect you don't want. It should be, I click this thing, it does the action, we're done here thinking about it. That is
gets out of your way, right?
Yeah. Right. And that's the philosophy of trying to not just do this in Fedora in the distribution, but we're also trying to simultaneously bring this up to the upstream projects, the GNOME project, the KDE Plasma project, and other places to try to refine these experiences there, to improve the default experiences for people, so that even if you're not using Fedora, you'll get some benefit from what we're doing. I mean, I personally think probably the best experience is on Fedora, but we don't hold all of our improvements close to the best. We bring it out in the open. We tell people how we did it, and they can even do it on their own systems. And so that's the way we try to roll here.
So speaking of that, what Fedora features, as someone who's been in it for a very long time, were you most excited about in 33? Mm-hmm. What was it that got you excited?
Oh man. Really? So that's a tough one. So I think it's a toss-up for me between Btrfs and systemd resolve D. The Btrfs change, because I really honestly think we should have made this change years ago, but having this change now as opposed to later is great. This change opens up so many doors in terms of improving the experience, providing optimizations for how user data versus system data is stored, getting us to a point to have future improvements like we don't have to reinstall the computer to do disk encryption, full disk encryption. That's a thing that like Windows and Mac have had from the very beginning. We still don't have it in Linux. And while it's true, we still don't have it even with Btrfs today. That's what I'm moving towards. I'm moving towards trying to improve those kinds of experiences. So things like, hey, maybe System 76 someday decides, they're going to wave a little flag and say, hey, we want to put Fedora on our things and make Fedora-based Pop! OS. Well, we would have the tools and infrastructure to be able to support OEM preloads, even branded and customized, but still be able to provide a high quality experience that matches or surpasses Windows and Mac OS. Now, on the other part where I was saying about systemd resolved, personally, one of the pain points I have as someone who's now doing this work from home thing, and I also juggle a lot of work in different open source projects, especially in infrastructures, I'm working with using 2 or 3 VPNs simultaneously. Many people don't realize this, but like Linux has actually never correctly supported multiple VPNs running in tandem. And the reason for that is that DNS across VPNs, if you're using just a plain etc resolve conf file, will just get clobbered. Like it's gonna mess up. It's gonna do the wrong thing. Moving to systemd resolved for the default resolver. So we have a local resolving recursive DNS, and then network manager, which is going to connect to resolved and configure it. Basically split horizon DNSs and zones for different VPNs and direct those queries to the right places, means that you effectively can run 2 or 3 VPN connections, direct traffic to each VPN correctly, and do DNS resolution on each VPN as you want. So, for example, my corporate VPN has a set of domains, and I configure those so that they all go through that domain for DNS queries and for network traffic. And then the OpenSUSE Heroes VPN, which I use for working in OpenSUSE infrastructure, has a different setup. And I can have both of them running at the same time, and everything just works and weird things don't happen, and I don't wind up losing internet access because DNS is broken. Because DNS being broken is very frustrating.
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
And like this is a thing that even Windows doesn't perfectly do right. And I'm very happy to see that we're making strides towards improving this.
Yeah. Does this have any effect as to like maybe because it can do resolved has the ability to do these multiple VPNs at the same time? Does that make it where you can transition back and forth that'll avoid like traffic leakage and stuff like that?
Yep. So you can with Network Manager. So like I can't speak about any other network management tools, but when you're using Network Manager, you can configure each VPN to direct traffic accordingly based on queries or net addresses, subnet masks, and whatnot. So that's things you can do. I don't know. I can't speak about other tools, but at least the ones that we've got in Fedora where it's based on Network Manager and things like that, you can do that now. GNOME's network configuration and Plasma's network configuration applets will both let you set this up. They don't necessarily they won't automatically do the thing where they'll say this is going to be exclusive like per VPN whatever's because most people only do one. But like if you have multiple VPNs, it's a simple checkbox to make it work that way.
Nice.
What are the next steps, Neal, for Fedora? You're obviously making progress on the desktop. Is there more success to be had? Are there more desktop users out there? And if so, how do we get them on Fedora?
Well, I mean, this kind of comes back to like people who are using it, people who try it and use it should share the love a little. Like, I'm sure each of you have had that story at some point where someone who was a Linux enthusiast gave you a CD or a DVD or a USB stick and said, hey, give it a shot, try it out. I think you'll like it and run with it. This is the story how most people, I think in the last 5 to 7 years have actually got into Linux. Very rarely will you have a story like mine where somebody goes into the library and there's just a random like whatever there, but like because yeah, whatever. But like that's one avenue, and I think that's probably the most important one. But also, we're now getting Fedora preloaded on computers, so that means that there's a whole set of problems that whole set of nervousness and anxiety that people don't have to deal with. So like I would say, go recommend the Lenovo ThinkPads with Fedora preloaded on them, or check out the Slimbook Essential that has a Fedora variant now. Like there are computers out there with Fedora preloaded, and go check those out and share those with other people and help people experience Linux that way. Because I think it doesn't matter how easy we make the installation processes or the setup process or whatever. Like I would argue Anaconda's like got the nicest, simplest experience for somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. But it's still a very scary proposition to say, well, you're about to erase everything on your computer.
Are you sure you want to?
Yeah, let's hope everything works right afterwards. And like, nobody should have to feel that kind of anxiety if they don't want to. I don't think anyone wants to feel anxiety, but like nobody should want to have to go through that process or have to go through that process. They should have an equally good option preloaded, and that's an avenue that we should start embracing and giving to other people. And insofar as Fedora development, like where I'm looking at for the Linux desktop, I think doubling down on making that move to Wayland, starting to improve the gaming experience and stuff like that. I think that's the real next frontier, because we've got the developer experience it's not great in every respect. Like, I still kind of wish we had a Visual Studio quality IDE where you had documentation and examples and like people could get started right away with making good applications and stuff. But we're better off than a lot of other alternatives when it comes to like making applications now. But what I would like to see is like we should focus on improving the gaming experience. We should start trying to make enthusiasts who tend to tweak and eke out all the performance in their computers to start thinking, well, instead of Windows, let's put Linux on this machine and really scream. Like, I would love it one day if an esports team could actually win with using Fedora on their computer rather than Windows.
I like that idea. That's fire right there.
That's awesome.
Yeah. And Neal, you're just touching on this question I had for you right now.
Sure.
What work are you seeing within Fedora as a contributor that has you so excited for the future after the 33 release? And you were just talking about that a bit.
Yeah, I mean, like, so the 33 release included the DXVK switch for Wine. So like now you're going to see if your hardware supports Vulkan and does it well, it'll auto switch to that when you try to run a Windows game through Wine on it, and so you'll get better performance and stuff like that. What I'm hoping for, what I'm excited for, is the continual effort to streamline the graphics pipeline, to improve the performance there, to broaden the hardware support. Getting that to be top tier is what I'm looking towards, and I see it incrementally every step of the way it's happening in Fedora First, with a lot of with the wonderful folks in the Red Hat desktop graphics team. They're doing a fantastic job, like bringing forward graphics performance. Like, we even have the AMD RAD-V driver from Mesa that was actually written, I think, by David Arley at Red Hat, and that outperforms in most cases AMD's own Vulkan driver. AMD VLK is most of the time slightly or very worse or much worse, that's a better phrase, than the RAD-V driver. And that's great, because it shows that people who are working together as a community who are really focused on improving the situation are able to be successful and deliver great results. Like, the thing I kind of am hoping for now is we've got to get something to replace CUDA. Like, CUDA is the chokehold right now in the graphics stack, because lots of applications, Windows, Linux, whatever, they tend to use CUDA for compute stuff, including encoding and decoding. And that isn't going to fly, because it's a proprietary standard that NVIDIA drives that only works on NVIDIA cards. Yeah, we need an open standard in that everyone can adopt and use. We don't have an equivalent right now, as far as I'm aware, to Windows's direct storage API. That's even even game consoles have some variant of that. Boy,
they are really firing that off right now. Yeah, in the gaming world. Yeah,
they're really pushing it. And these are the things that I'm concerned about. I don't necessarily have any power to make any of those things, because I don't know how that stuff works. I'm not that good at that kind of thing. Like, I like hardware, but hardware programming is not my forte. But these are the things where I'm looking towards the future, and I'm thinking these are the things as a community and as a platform that we need to start moving towards, because if we don't, I don't know how we're going to break past that ceiling that we have right now. But we are inching towards that ceiling, and I'm very happy with the progress that we're making.
Love it.
I want to see a lot more work on OpenCL. I mean, CUDA, always renders quicker, and it has, for a while. And OpenCL, though, was kind of king back in the day when I would set up my render farms for my animation business. It was all OpenCL back in those days.
It all started out as OpenCL, and then it switched to CUDA later on.
And then they switched to CUDA, and it was OpenGL before that.
Yeah.
Well,
OpenGL for encoding and rendering is not fun.
Yes, no, I've been there.
It's like one of the worst APIs for that kind of stuff. But like this is with Vulkan, with SpearV, and all these things that are going on in the Cronus group. Those are the things I'm concerned about, because I don't know who I need to be saying into the void. I don't know which part of the void I need to be shouting into, but I'm shouting to the void, and I'm like, we need these things, because I don't know how we're going to compete, mid to long term without equivalents to those that either match or surpass. Mm-hmm. And maybe somebody needs to re-implement CUDA as a free implementation that operates on top of OpenCL first. That might actually be a thing that we need. I don't know. But we need to do something, because that's the part where I'm looking forward, past 34, 35, whatever. This is the nebulous future type, where it's like, this is what we need to start breaking past those last barriers to make Linux a successful platform on the desktop.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of great points, and I think that there's a lot of stuff that has been happening in terms of like improvements for the future of the desktop for many years. And one of those things is the universal formats, in my opinion. So we have the snaps and flat packs and app images and that sort of stuff. And there's still some controversy about what the relevance for these formats are and that sort of stuff. And as a package manager, what is your take on the effectiveness of these types of formats? And do you have a preference of any of the formats in general, these three, that kind of thing?
Okay, so this is
it's a loaded question.
It's a loaded question. Yeah.
All right, so I'm going to give you a somewhat nuanced answer, because it's a little hard to tear apart like what exactly I want to say for this. But I think the universal package formats aren't helping. They don't help the real problem we have with Linux right now. Distribution is something, ironically, that I think we've got so well done in spades, we don't need more of them. This is a somewhat unpopular opinion, but that being said, the systems that we have now, even RPM being used as a universal format, which is possible. I actually used to do it professionally before. Using RPM as universal format is possible. Flatpak as a universal format is fine. Snap as a universal format is fine as well. Of the three types, I think RPM and Snapcraft are the best developer experiences in terms of package formats. And having done this with RPM, Deb, Flatpak, Snap, App Image, everything, like I've done a lot of them. RPM and Snap are the nicest developer experiences for packaging software. The Flatpak developer experience it's getting better, but it really needs work. The user experience for Flatpak is actually better right now. I think this will change in the near term. I think I've seen some improvements from the Snap team recently that I think will help. I'm just playing wait and see there. But I think that the real issue we have is that people don't know how to make apps. Like, there are no examples, there's no guidelines or interface guidelines and things like that. You look at Elementary OS, like they've created fantastic documentation and guidelines, HIG, a human interface guideline for for people who don't know, a human interface guideline that describes the user experience paradigm that Elementary OS is trying to achieve, gives you examples, gives you patterns, gives you, code that you can look at, and people build applications on them and ship them on the Elementary App Center. And this is what tells me the package format matters so little. It is really the part about making applications is what sucks. To be clear, both the GNOME and KDE projects have recognized that this is a thing. And if you go look at gtk.org right now, or develop.kde.org, they are clearly working on it. It is just happening too slow. I think KDE will eventually get there first, because they have this whole comprehensive framework thing. They've got the Kirigami patterns and stuff, and they're starting to come up with this whole design pattern for how applications should work. So there's something happening on that front. On the GNOME side, they've actually had an HIG for like going on 10 years. They don't necessarily follow it that well with their own applications, but they've got one, and it mostly is fine. They lack in code examples. They lack in documentation in terms of patterns and tutorials and stuff. And this is the next step, I think, for making desktop Linux more successful is that you've got to help people be successful in being creative, making applications. Because clearly it shows that the universal package formats, while they probably help a little bit, like even in my own experience as a corporate, third-party packager for my day job, I don't care about the universal formats. I've actually been very successful using, RPMs and debs and whatever, like using RPM spec files to build for all the different targets. I've given talks about it and stuff, but like that doesn't matter so much. What matters is that people need to figure out how to make applications, because it doesn't matter how you distribute it if you can't even figure out how to make an app to distribute. So that's my real problem. Like, that's why I want to see more work in developer.fedoraproject.org. I want to see more work on gtk.org. I want to see more work on develop.kde.org. I want to see more focus on improving the quality of life for people making any kind of Linux application, desktop Linux, command line tools, services, web apps, whatever, but especially for desktop Linux applications, because this is why we suffer, is because we're missing that piece.
Very interesting view.
Thank you, Neal. Always being a resource to so many of us within Linux, and all of the work that you do for maintaining these critical packages and your insight into these things. I just thank you for coming on the program, being willing to share all this with us.
Yeah,
it's my pleasure.
Yeah,
I love
you,
hanging
Neal.
out with you guys.
well, we love you being here. And obviously, one of our patrons said you need to stop being so shy, Neal, and speak up in the future because you're a wealth of knowledge. No, you do a great job. And thank you for fact checking us for all these episodes.
Yes.
You help keep us on track, and we really do appreciate it.
Well,
Thanks,
it's my
Neal.
pleasure.
Our security advisory this week is brought to you by Bitwarden. And this security advisory is to be cautious about what apps you're installing on your phone. Many social media apps and just many websites in general are constantly hounding you about installing their specific particular app for more optimal experience. And the reason they really want you to do this is that the apps so they can collect more information about you, like your location, your microphone access, text, camera access, or contacts, and so much more. Especially the most annoying thing about, like, would you like to connect or sync your contacts and stuff so we can have all the people in your contacts address book and stuff? Anyway, if you can view it through your browser or simply not use it at all, you'll have more control in keeping that data private. So keep that in mind. And if you want another way to stay secure, you can get a password manager. And a great password manager that we use and trust is Bitwarden. Bitwarden lets you set up things like a PIN to easily access your password manager, as well as additional authentication such as master passwords and adding passphrases into fingerprint security and all this, so much more to keep your passwords safe. Bitwarden is the easiest and safest way for individuals, teams, and businesses to store, share, and sync sensitive data. You can go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started with your free account. Bitwarden is a great password manager, and I use and trust it. I've been using it for many years, and one of the reasons I switched to it was because I found out that it was 100% open source software, and it also allows you to do self-hosting if you'd like to do that. But one of the things that I loved about it when I first found it is, in addition to the open source aspects, they also do security audits. So go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started with your free account. But if you're like me, you want to make the smart move and get the premium account, because that premium account gives you a lot of extra cool features, and get 1 gigabyte of encrypted file storage, 2-step login with YubiKey, U2F Duo, and so much more, including Vault Health Reports, TOTP authenticator storage and generation, and so much more. Go to bitwarden.com/DLN to get started with your free account and make the smart move like many from the community have, and get your free account, or get that $10 per year premium edition, because it's definitely worth it. And thanks again to Bitwarden for sponsoring this episode of Destination Linux.
Space, a Linux frontier. Linux isn't just useful here on Earth, it's good for the entire galaxy. And as proof, SpaceX launched not 1, but 2 separate Falcon 9 rockets loaded with Starlink satellites for its broadband internet service just last week, which brings the total to just around 1,000 of these low orbiting satellites. This will be, so wonderful for internet access for those people who are still on dial-up and old DSL.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is gonna open the world up to people on the internet who do not have access. And the space station, that amazing modular space station floating around on our planet, also runs Linux. They, in fact, switched from Windows to Linux on the desktop in 2013. And If that's not exciting enough, how about Microsoft partnering with SpaceX, leveraging Azure Space to handle all space-related businesses attached to its cloud data efforts? What does this boil down to? Linux is everywhere, and its application capabilities are endless. It's exciting to see Linux leveraged in the future of space exploration and discovery. And it also means experience in Linux is going to continue to be a hot commodity for jobs in these fields, and especially to Starlink, where this will provide millions of people access to higher broadband internet to locations where access has been unreliable, expensive, or completely unavailable.
Yeah, this is massive
It's
for
just
when we
massive.
talk about when you're trying to convince somebody to get into Linux. I hear a lot of people will say, hey, you use it every day if you have an Android device. I think Android is probably the worst representation of Linux out there, so I tend to avoid that one. But this is something I would use to convince somebody about Linux and the power of it.
Yeah.
It's also what I would use to convince somebody to think about the future. If you are interested in telecommunications, if you are interested in getting into data analysis, into cloud data storage, Linux here is powering all of these future technologies. The introduction about the Moonwater joke at the beginning of the show, the reality is this week they found water that they always suspected it was there, but they found that on the moon, right? That it was frozen on the moon. And so where they suspected it would be, they were able to prove that it was actually there. And all of this technology, all of these things floating around in outer space are being powered by this operating system we talk about every single week, this kernel. And they are leveraging it in so many different ways, including how Microsoft is leveraging it with its Azure platform to start creating partnerships with these companies.
Mm-hmm.
And that just shows you the power and flexibility of this. Imagine trying to send a rocket into space with Windows 10 on it, and it needs to do an update. Just imagine.
Right. it needs to do a blue screen.
A train wreck.
Yeah.
In the middle of, you're about to exit the orbit, and an update is available, and you can't tell that update to go away. And the rocket comes.
Would you like to
crashing back
postpone your
Earth.
landing for 4 hours?
Yes.
Clippy coming up on the screen in the middle of needing to eject your rockets. I mean, these are.
I can help you with that.
Yeah.
So this is why I when I was reading about this and learning more and more about it, number one, these articles that I covered here, these were not just Linux articles. These were in mainstream news talking about Microsoft's partnership using Azure and Linux. It was in mainstream news about the International Space Station switching to Linux, mainstream news about SpaceX Falcon 9 rockets, which everybody wants to watch those things take off and land, all utilizing Linux.
Yeah.
This to me is insanely exciting for Linux.
Yeah. And for that mission critical, you do not want the blue screen of death when you're in space if you're having to rely on an operating system. And that's just so true. And for me, this is a topic that is so near and dear to me. Okay, so not only do I live in the community called the South Bay of Los Angeles, it's one of the largest aerospace communities and think tanks in the world, but I live by SpaceX and JPL and all the companies that NASA work at and contract with. And both my grandparents were rocket scientists for NASA before and during the Apollo years.
Nice.
Unbelievable.
That is amazing.
Oh my gosh.
And when you find out what they did, I don't, I look at my life and I'm like, I haven't accomplished anything. So I hear about my grandparents. Okay, so
when your parents would tell you in a math problem or something, it's not rocket science, Jill. They literally knew that it wasn't rocket science.
Yeah.
My dad joke, Michael. Am I going to get?
I applaud.
Yeah,
I applaud.
Okay,
there you go.
Very good.
Yeah.
So my grandfather was head of the surveyor mission to the moon and was one of the chief engineers of the Apollo missions. He was the chief engineer that said, let's launch Apollo missions into space.
Oh my gosh.
And my grandmother and her team built the engine on the lunar exploration module, the one that brought our astronauts home on Apollo 13. And they both had gotten presidential awards, from the president, accommodations for the work they did on the missions. So I've lived it.
I don't know how to physically express mind blowing, but that's happened right now.
And it just excites me so much. And including many of my animation students at the local community college that I teach at work at SpaceX and NASA. Nice. And because I'm just right down the street from them. So I help them build some of their animations and their walkthroughs with different scenarios. So that's been kind of cool and learning how to do that. And I really get excited when my aerospace students talk about Linux and mention that they use Debian and CentOS and Scientific Linux. And this is many years ago, and in fact, because Linux has been used on the back end at NASA for many years. And before that, they were using Unix and BSD. And the International Space Station, ISS, for instance, runs on 1988 vintage 20 megahertz Intel i386 CPUs. They need that older hardware that's hardened for space flight because it's stable. And they essentially are making embedded computers, that will withstand the radiation and all the serious threats that come from being in space.
Right. Yeah. That makes sense.
And Linux being the Swiss Army knife of all the OSs, with its, being so memory efficient, so fast, and the flexibility of size and stability is the obvious choice for the old hardware up in the space station. So, and I've actually been to many JPL talks about how they used Linux on the Spirit and Opportunity rovers. And that was just so fascinating. The flexibility and the ability to, upgrade the software, not instantly. It would take a while to get there, but they could update the Linux software, thus updating the hardware capabilities of the rovers. It's really amazing. And I just, way back when, I'd even installed the Amigo software that JPL uses to control the Mars rovers when they were launched for Debian, because that's what they were using at that time. And I had a lot of fun playing around with that in the beta. And so Linux is it's all over space. And even the European Space Agency migrated over to SUSE Linux back in 2012. So, everyone is using it in space. They need that stability. And for mission critical, when your life depends on it and your mission depends on it, you need something stable and secure.
Well, I was so excited to see this article and kind of build this story out, knowing you were going to be joining Destination Linux, because your experience here, I knew a little bit about it, but not that much. Now, I don't want to brag. My grandfather was able to open a particularly stubborn pickle jar once. But your stories there with the rocket science is just amazing. So thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, that's amazing. And there's so, like, I knew a little bit about the space stuff, but all that other stuff it's fantastic. And, we definitely appreciate you sharing all that. And this is kind of a funny thing about, like, the fact that you're wearing the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt that's available in the DLNstore.com, by the way. That is, it's really cool, because when I made that shirt, I knew that it was in space, but I didn't know it was in that degree in space. Like, it's not only is it everywhere, it's even off planet. And, it's
intergalactic.
It's pretty much everywhere at this point.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's amazing.
So in our gaming this week, something not quite as exciting as space, at least for me, is Facebook is entering the cloud gaming arena, because why not? It seems to be the thing everyone does now. So if 2020 was looking down for you, here's your exciting news to bring your spirits back up. You can play video games from Facebook. They're joining the ranks of NVIDIA, GeForce Now, Google Stadia, Amazon Luna, Microsoft Xbox Game Pass to compete with all of these services. However, I will say this. They did come out very specifically and say, look, we're not looking to replace your console. We're not looking to replace your PC. We're not creating a service like that. What we're going to do is we're going to offer you a streaming service with games that has no monthly fee and no cost. Out of the kindness of their heart, they want nothing back from you except all your data and to run some ads. So you're going to have this. Do you guys remember, was it Net Zero back when we were dial up, and
it
would run ads. It was free. You could do dial up for free, but it would run these ads in the corner. I don't know. I guess that's what it kind of reminds me of is now, if you've ever played some of these mobile games, especially in the Android Google Play Store, and you just download a random game and you make a few moves in the game and all of a sudden an ad pops up that you have to watch until that ad's over, and then you can continue playing your video game. Now you can
play those anywhere.
Yeah. Now you can play those exciting, annoying games everywhere is kind of my personal take on how I feel like this service is going to run. But the good news is that if you are a Facebook fan and somehow listening to this podcast and somehow utilizing Linux for privacy and security, if you've somehow passed all of those, you can run this in Linux.
Yay.
And it includes games like Alpha 9, Mobile Legends Adventure by Moonton, PGA Tour Golf, Solitaire. Which, why not?
Sure.
I mean, to me, I'm already signing up as soon as we get off the show today. WWE Supercard by 2K, and coming soon, Dirt Bike Unchained by Red Bull. So it's actually now it's like by the sponsors, right? That are coming in.
So that's an advertisement for the game.
They actually put in advertising in just telling you the game was around. Brought to you by Red Bull. So if that doesn't have you excited for 2020, I don't know what will, but there you go. Facebook entering into the game streaming market. But you know what's more exciting is GameFest November 15th, where you won't have to listen to a bunch of ads to play the games, because we are going to be playing Xonotic on our own Destination Linux server hosted by DigitalOcean. We're going to be playing Super Tux Kart on our own Destination Linux server hosted by DigitalOcean out there. And we're also going to be playing Among Us, which is really popular right now. And Noah, you're going to like this game. You don't shoot people, but you do murder people secretly, and then people try to find out if you're the secret agent that's doing all the killing.
It's much fun.
Well, we'll have you in Xonotic anyways. There you go. Yeah, there you go.
We're continuing our exploration of the Linux file system in our tips and tricks section this week. So far, we've covered everything from temp to serve. This week, we're going to be covering /sys. /sys is another virtual directory like proc and /dev that contain information about devices connected to your system. Now, modern Linux distributions include a /sys directory as a virtual file system, which not only stores, but allows modifications of devices connected to the system. /sys can be dangerous if you break your system messing around in here. If you don't know what you're doing, could be dangerous. So if you want to play with it in a VM before you make any changes. Of course, we invite you to go back and listen to previous episodes that cover previous parts of the Linux file system, and continue to stay tuned as we continue to explore Linux file system on our tips of the week software pick section.
So up next in the Spotlight section, we're going to talk about the PhD2 guiding software. So what does that mean? So we're going to, since we talked about space exploration and that kind of thing, you can do some space exploration at home with a telescope while leveraging the power of Linux using PhD2 software. So PhD2 is a telescope guiding software that simplifies the process of tracking a guide star, letting you concentrate on other aspects of deep sky imaging instead. And there's also things for experienced users and beginner users. So just a quick note, if you're a beginner to this, like I definitely would be, there's a setup wizard to be getting started with just a few mouse clicks, extensive support for commonly used equipment, smart calibration for automatically adjusting for side of peer and pointing location and that sort of stuff, intelligent default settings for out-of-the-box results, tools for drift alignment and comment tracking, proactive suggestions and advisory messages to improve your guiding, and all sorts of stuff. It even has experienced improvements for the people who are experienced with doing it, like multiple algorithm choices for each telegroup axis, guiding assistance for measuring mount performance, and so much more, including quick and easy switching between multiple imaging configurations and a ton of more stuff. If you're interested in this, like you want to do some space exploration on your own at home, then there's a great time to do it. Check out the PhD2 guiding software, and we'll have links in the show notes below.
That's it. A wrap on Destination Linux episode 198 now with Jill. A big thank you to each and every one of you by supporting us, watching us, listening to Destination Linux. However you do it, we appreciate you so much. And if you want more DL, become a patron like all of these beautiful faces here with us right now and get a bunch of perks like unedited versions of the show, VIP access to events and live recordings of Destination Linux every Sunday, and come hang out and talk with the crew. In fact, with GameFest coming up, because we can't have everybody, a lot of games have limits of 4 to 8 people. Obviously, patrons, you're going to be able to jump in there and play with us first. And then other games where it's more open, everyone can join in. There's a lot of perks to becoming a patron, so consider joining.
So it's time for you to join the DLN community. Yes, you, right there, watching the show. Join the DLN community. We also have our Matrix and Telegram and Discord, and they're all bridged together now, so you can join the over 1,000 plus community members discussing open source Linux and everything else on the platform of your choice. So if whether you like Matrix or Telegram or Discord, you can use all of them and have the same conversation with everybody. That's the wonders of bridging the social media and stuff like that. So check it out. We'll have links in the show notes for how you can join the DLN community.
Do you realize how many amazing shows are now part of the Destination Linux network? If you didn't, then let me just name a few. We have the new Sudo show. We have the Ask Noah show, This Week in Linux, DOS Geek, DLN Extend, the wonderful Hardware Addicts, and we even have a new show coming from a name you know well and are going to love. So go to DestinationLinux.Network and subscribe to all these shows to get the full Monty of Linux and open source awesome sauce.
Everybody have a great week, and remember that the journey itself is just as important as the destination.
Yeah.
Yeah.
See you next week.
Good job.